Welcome, everybody. I am Tara Reitz, and I am here with Dr. Ed Tick. Dr. Edward Tick, PhD, is an archetypal psychotherapist, author, educator, international pilgrimage guide, and activist. He is an expert on ancient Greece and the origins of medicine and psychotherapy in the Asclepian tradition, and on his holistic healing of violent and war trauma. Ed's books, The Practice of Dream Healing, War in the Soul, and Soul Medicine, are modern classics. He has pioneered healing through archetypal awakening and cultural immersion for over 40 years and is honored for his groundbreaking work in veteran healing. In addition to his private practice, Ed works in Greece and Vietnam on holistic and spiritual-based healing in the restoration of ancient practices. He has served the U.S. military as subject matter expert on post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury and has led 22 healing pilgrimages to Greece and 19 to Vietnam. Author of 18 previous books, including the award-winning War and the Soul, Ed uses the Greek tradition extensively in healing, writing, and teaching. Wow. That is a lot. That is a lot of pilgrimages as well. So I'm going to hand it over to you and take it away.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tara. I'm honored to be with you and to support this important effort you're making in bringing spiritual awareness and guidance to our planet that is, as we all know, suffering very much from the lack of spirituality and community in ways that are intact and important in living. So thank you for what you're doing and for having me as your guest. Honored to be with you. Let's see, since you mentioned my pilgrimages, and yes, I've led 22 to Greece and 19 to Vietnam. We might start right there, that I do leave our culture, our society, and our way of thinking, of responding to human afflictions and suffering. I really work to leave that behind, and through immersion, deep immersion, experience of other cultures with their moral and ethical and spiritual and communal practices, and with a deep experience of their spirituality, that we as Americans and other nationalities immerse in their way of thinking, feeling, acting, doing, healing, practicing their spirituality, and that brings profound and transformational healing to all of us who participate. And so, well, if we put them together, 22 to Greece and 19. So I've led over 40 pilgrimages to these two countries. A few have included other countries as well, but not as the main focus. And so somewhere around 400-500 people, Americans, that I've taken overseas on these journeys. And almost universally, not quite, but almost, like 98 or 99% of the people have really profound spiritual breakthroughs, psychological and emotional healing, deeply enter the other cultures, so much so that they even become devotees of that culture. Like some of the Vietnam veterans I brought back to Vietnam, who originally had severe post-traumatic stress disorder and could hardly function on their own, they've healed so much that they lead their own journeys to Vietnam now.
Oh, wow.
Some of the people I've taken to Greece have gone back 2 or 3 times with me or on their own. One couple who met on a Greek journey fell in love on the journey, and they're happily married now.
Wow.
And in that relationship, the husband is a Vietnam veteran who had severe PTSD, and he did achieve an amazing breakthrough healing in Greece. We did go to Vietnam together as well as Greece, but his major healing was in Greece. And after that, he went back to Vietnam on his own. He's written books about it, and he leads journeys there on his own as well. So that's a cat. Just a small taste of how extensive the healing and the life transformations can be.
Mhm.
So just a little taste to give back to you and explore where we would like to go with this.
Wow, like I mean, that's exciting. I've heard of people going on pilgrimages and they end up moving there, or
Hmm.
they just their lives just drastically change. I personally have been on one back in 2019, locally here in Colorado and throughout a little bit of New Mexico. And we focused more on the Tibetan Buddhism.
Hmm.
So Colorado has so many temples out there
Yeah.
of Tibetan Buddhism. And so we traveled throughout certain ones. And I mean, that just opened me up even more because here in Pennsylvania, we are in a very loving way, very traditional, mostly religious. So connecting with a different culture
Hmm.
is very difficult. I
Yeah.
live in a community that's mostly white and religious. And so opening myself up to the world, to cultures of the world is difficult unless I go, go somewhere,
Hmm.
whether it is a pilgrimage or even to a different country and explore. And what I had experienced in my pilgrimage is just a big shift of healing and also death. In Tibetan Buddhism, they kind of they like praise in a way death and the passing of death.
Hmm.
They chant about it, they welcome it, actually. That's a better word. They welcome in death because it is a part of life. And oftentimes we get wrapped up in worrying and being afraid of death and dying, whether it's ourselves or for others. And that can be emotionally draining when you're so afraid of your own death and somebody else's death that you just stop kind of living. You live more like a zombie because
Hmm.
you're afraid. And I've noticed since then, other cultures are just better at welcoming death and welcoming all aspects of life. And here we are struggling with depression and dissociation and insomnia. And we're afraid of dying. And it's like, but all the other countries are okay with it. Can you explain a little bit more what your experience was in Greece and Vietnam and
Yes.
your many years of studies?
Sure. Your comments are a perfect way for us to continue this exploration in several ways. So I want to respond about pilgrimage as a universal spiritual practice that's thousands of years old, and also about our relationship to death and dying, which you're absolutely right, varies from culture to culture, tradition and religion and spiritual practices greatly. And we in the United States are among the most individualistic, materialistic, narcissistic, death denying cultures on the planet. And much of our personal and collective struggles comes from that very negative attitude
Mhm.
that's really um, disharmonious with life and the life cycle, as you said, because death is a part of life. Right. So first, regarding pilgrimage, yes, we can take pilgrimages right here on home territory. We can take a pilgrimage in our own neighborhood.
Mhm.
So for all of our friends who are listening, let's just affirm pilgrimage has been uh, a major force for growth, healing, spiritual development, and awakening for humanity for tens of thousands of years. We know that even very ancient people, we're not talking about ancient Greece and Rome and China and Vietnam, talking about Neanderthal people and Neolithic people. The very early human beings also went on pilgrimages. So a pilgrimage for everybody, so we have a working understanding together, is when we choose to go on long, difficult, demanding journeys away from home and away from what's comfortable and familiar, and put ourselves in new places with new people and new cultural environment, or the natural environment, of course, going out in nature, and giving ourselves ordeals and challenges that will grow and change us. And there are many different kinds of pilgrimages. We could go to a Zen monastery anywhere in the world, and boy, will they put us on a spiritual pilgrimage. We
Yes.
don't have to go anywhere else. We just have to sit in meditation all week long.
Yeah.
And we're journeying internally.
Mhm.
And that will be profound changes. And we can go on wilderness quests. And we can go, as I'm leading, on long cultural adventures and immersions to different cultures that think and behave and act and have different values and understandings of the universe than we have. So pilgrimage has been practiced for tens of thousands of years and still is, and we can do it in as small or larger way as we choose. One of the things, I'll say something even larger about becoming comfortable with death.
Mhm.
For well, pilgrimages all have the same essential ingredients, components. So we leave the comfortable for the unfamiliar. We travel someplace distant, even if it's only internally, but internally and or externally, we travel to a distant, unfamiliar place. We often, not always, but we often do pilgrimage with other pilgrims, fellow brothers and sisters who are also traveling and looking for spiritual growth and transformation. And so we have similar goals and we travel together with them. And again, often, but not always, there's a leader or facilitator, like a Buddhist monk who has been on the journey before, and they're hopefully a few chapters ahead of us in the life journey, and so they'll be able to guide us from where we are onward. So pilgrimage has all of those components, whether it's Buddhist or Native American or Greek or Vietnamese or Neolithic, doesn't matter. All of those are universal conditions,
Mhm.
and they all bring about profound transformation. Now, you're right also that many pilgrimages, they are either about confronting our mortality directly. The lesson is usually there. If we're
Mhm.
out in the wilderness and we're not eating for 4 or 5 days, and we hear coyotes and bobcats and bears nearby, we're not so comfortable. It's not familiar, and we have to get comfortable with nature, with ourselves, and connect with the spirits of the land and the creatures around us, so that we're all at peace with each other.
Mhm.
And it can be very frightening and challenging, and sometimes even life-threatening. People sometimes have that serious an experience. So going on pilgrimage to the unfamiliar and confronting and surviving the unfamiliar and learning from it is part of the healing that happens. Now, there's a core concept um, of the concept of initiation that
Mhm.
we all experience when we're on pilgrimage. And initiation is a psychological, sociological, anthropological concept. And we use the word death. Initiation means going through a psychological, spiritual death and rebirth.
Mhm.
So, and it's we can also think of Joseph Campbell's work with the hero's journey.
Yes.
The shape of the initiation is a departure from the ordinary and the common and the everyday, uh, traveling into the underworld, the unmapped and dangerous territory in some form. So we go through a descent into the underworld, and we go through meeting the unfamiliar and the uncomfortable, and learning about it and about ourselves and our nature, our strength, our courage, our wisdom, our faith, and going through the transformation. So The old personality is dying and a new personality is being reborn.
Mhm.
So we're actually in the life cycle, we're always going through death rebirth cycles only. And again, here, other cultures mark it far better and wiser than we do in our culture. We only have a few initiations left in our mainstream culture.
Mhm.
So graduating high school, going to college, if people do, unfortunately, less people do, but graduating and achieving and graduating from education, so we get a degree and we're recognized as different by the
Mhm.
society. I've got a college degree. Oh, suddenly people do and they should expect more from me.
Mhm.
And I'm behaving as an elder and in my discipline. So that's initiation. That's the death of the child self or the adolescent self and a rebirth into a young adult self. Ideally, we go through initiations throughout the whole life cycle. Our culture doesn't mark that. So we have school graduations, we have in the Christian tradition, we have baptism and confirmation. In the Jewish tradition, is the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. And then that's about it. And well, we get married. Some people get married and die, and we all die. Those are big changes into a different life stage. Other cultures mark the changes we go through throughout the whole life cycle. So, for example, there's some traditional tribes in South America put people through a really intense death rebirth initiation ceremonies every 10 years.
Oh.
Oh, you're born. You've gone from the invisible world into the embodied world. That's a death rebirth. You're
Yeah.
10 years old. You're going from the child self to into the teenage self. 20 years old, you're becoming an adult. 30 years old, now the tribe expects more from you. You're mature and you can be a leader and a parent and a
Mhm.
teacher, and a guide. So in those cultures, every 10 years, the old self dies, the new self is reborn. And in those cultures, you even get a new name every 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So really, the culture sees you as a different person. In the Native American tradition, we know of vision quests where people will go through intensive ceremonies, and then also from 1 to 4 days they go out into the wilderness. When they come back, they get a new name.
Yeah.
Also,
Mhm.
that's also considered a death rebirth. The old self has died, and a new self who is older, wiser, more mature, more spiritually advanced is coming back to serve the family and the people and the tribe. And everybody, by giving the person a new name, recognizes that. Um, ev- Most people have heard of Crazy Horse. the, so we can talk about him as common knowledge. However, about Crazy Horse, he was a medicine man. Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse is a bad translation for his name from the Lakota. A better translation, and it also shows how he's being misinterpreted by mainstream white culture.
Mhm.
We call him Crazy Horse. A better translation of his name would be something like Prancing Spirit Horse.
Mm.
Not crazy in the mental
Right.
health every day we use. No, he was visited and entered and transformed by spirits, and it was a horse in particular. And so
Mm.
and he went on 7 different vision quests. So he had received a different name each time and different spirit guides and helpers. So he was becoming more and more spiritually empowered, a stronger warrior and medicine man, getting new names and painting himself and decorating himself in his clothing and even painting his horse differently based on the symbols that he was given. So then for his people, he fully embodies this new medicine chief and warrior, prancing spirit horse, and they all see him and treat him that way. In cultures where the death rebirth cycle is practiced regularly through their community and spiritual and religious practices, uh, they also, as you earlier said, see death as a process of life and that we're just changing forms. And
Mhm.
so it's nothing to be frightened of.
Right.
This exists in the Greek tradition as well.
Mm.
Some people have heard it many different ways, but I'll mention a few. Well, we've all heard of Socrates.
Yes. Yeah.
And we all know that Socrates, most people know, Socrates was a spiritual man who gave us the concept of soul, the soul that we have now.
Mhm.
Or Socrates, they had the word, but people thought the soul was something like a ghost, just
Yeah.
an after image that floats away and becomes disembodied. But Socrates taught us that the soul is uh, our deep core inner being, and also the source of our ability to determine right from wrong, good from evil,
Mhm.
and that we actually grow and deepen when we choose and do the good. Our souls grow, and we hurt our souls and they shrink, like the Grinch, the little heart that was too many sizes too small, that when we do wrong, when we harm other people, our hearts and our souls are shrinking like that. We
Yeah.
become meaner, and we're hurting ourselves and we're hurting others. So they had the concept of the soul, and that the soul can grow and deepen or be harmed and hurt. Socrates also taught, and all of the Greek philosophers taught, that philosophy is the what we study in order to live a good life. It's not, back then, it wasn't an esoteric academic discipline that very few people can understand and or use, but rather uh, philosophia literally means being a friend of wisdom. And Sophia was the goddess of wisdom, but it wasn't weird esoteric stuff. It was how to live a good life well for yourself and for others, how to participate in society and live well, not hurting yourself or others. So being a philosopher was being a friend of wisdom, and it was meant to prepare us for death. So when we read the dialogues of Socrates drinking the hemlock poison,
Mhm.
he's gathered with his friends and his students in the last days of his life. They're frightened because he's going to die and they're going to lose him. And he keeps saying, I can't convince you that Socrates won't be dead. My body will be dead, but Socrates is going somewhere else. And I, you're going to, please don't cry and miss me. My soul is still alive and well and living somewhere else. And who knows, maybe I'm going to talk with Homer and the other great philosophers. And maybe it's better on the other side. And if it's not, maybe it's just a long, dreamless sleep. So we're at peace. So he was really not afraid. Philosophy was meant to teach people to not be afraid. And the great teachers of all the traditions learned. Buddha was peaceful.
Mhm.
All the great teachers of all the religious traditions were peaceful and accepting that death is not the end of our spiritual life, it's only the end of our mortal life. One more thing about Greece. The Greek tradition is, some people have heard of what are called the Eleusinian mysteries or the Eleusinian mysteries. They're spelled Eleusis in English.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
right. These were mystery practices. They lasted over 2,000 years, and people went to a site called Eleusis, which is not far from Athens. It's like a half hour, 40-minute car taxi ride from Athens. But this is the place where, in Greek mythology, the goddess Demeter, the goddess of the grain of the
Mhm.
earth, um, where Persephone, her daughter, was kidnapped and taken to the underworld by Hades, the god of the underworld, and
Yeah.
kept down there. And Demeter came and she grieved there.
Mhm.
And most school children learn this myth, and that this is why we have the seasons, because Persephone was kept underground and all life died on earth. Everything became winter until she came back, but she had to return. She actually became Hades' wife, and she became the queen of the underworld. So she had to go back every year for one season, and that's winter. And
Mhm.
then spring is Persephone's rebirth. So all the beautiful wildflowers and the spring rains and the warm sunshine that we get is Persephone coming back.
Mhm.
So we learn that, and that's one of the ways that we learn what mythology, or we're taught that mythology were superstitious stories that explain natural events that we don't understand yet. That's way not all that mythology is.
Right.
Way not all, and we can talk about that. But regarding Demeter and Persephone, so at this site called Eleusis, for about 2,000 years, there were mystery rituals practiced there where people, they came from all over the Mediterranean world. They walked from Athens. It's a 2-day walk from Athens to Eleusis, and everybody was invited, even expected. This was a major spiritual religious event of their culture,
Mhm.
where people spent 9 days walking there, and then 7 days in intensive rituals where they actually replicated Persephone's descent to the underworld through rituals, through maybe substances that they were given to
Right.
replicate the experience of dying.
Mhm.
Um, People replicated Persephone's descent into the underworld and staying down there in the darkness for a long time and being transformed there. And the testimony we have from those times is from people who went through this is that the purpose of this ritual was to learn that the body dies, but the soul is immortal, and
Mhm.
to heal people from their fear of death.
Mm.
And so we have beautiful testimony from those times, including from some famous people like Pindar, who was a priest in this tradition of that going through these rituals really healed him of his fear of death. In fact, he wrote a beautiful letter to his wife that survives. They had a 3-year-old daughter who died. He was away from home. The wife was home alone. He wrote this beautiful letter of consolation to his wife, reminding her that though we miss our daughter and will always grieve her, we're not grieving her soul, because we know her soul is alive and immortal, because we're both initiates of the mystery, and we both learned that the soul lasts forever and goes somewhere else and is reborn somehow. So don't grieve too much for our daughter, but love and support through prayer and memory through her soul that is immortal. So the Vietnamese are Buddhist, and they're not afraid of death, and that's one of the many reasons that they won the war that we call the Vietnam War, but they call the American War.
Mhm.
They are communal. They believe in reincarnation. They were willingly dying for their country, not fearing that it's the end, just that it's the end of this life, but they're fulfilling their duty and their karma. They'll be reincarnated. And so there's nothing to fear. Whereas American soldiers, of course, feared individual death, and they just wanted to live through the war and get home safely.
Mhm.
So the Vietnamese were not afraid to die and sacrificed many more lives than the Americans. It's one of many reasons. And we learned that when I lead pilgrimages to Vietnam as well. They're very, very, very happy, peaceful people. Um, they even say that all the deaths during the war were the karma of the people who had died. So they're not even angry at Americans for all the death we caused.
Wow.
We're so glad you've come back, heal with us. Uh, we're sorry you have post-traumatic stress disorder. We know about it. We don't suffer that way here.
Yeah, I think you said that in your book. I remember hearing you say something about that, how even after the Vietnam War, they healed in community together. And because of that and their traditions of healing, there's very little PTSD. And then here in the United States, that's all you can really hear about, or depression, anxiety, insomnia. Um, and that's what really separates us, the United States, from so many countries, is that we don't heal in community. We don't heal together. Maybe our military comes home, they have a little adjustment period, and then they get sent home into civilian life. They don't really heal together in community with their sisters and brothers that they just fought a war for. And now they're left really to just fend for themselves in a way. And I mean, that's really what makes us so different, not necessarily in a good way, from many other countries.
Yes. People, it takes, let's compare it to the Greek tradition again,
Okay.
and even the Vietnamese tradition, both. So, well, in ancient Greece, people had 2 full years of military training before they were allowed to go into combat.
Oh, wow.
Okay. That's in Athens. In Sparta, the the boys and the women, the young women too, they were raised from childhood to
Mm-hmm.
be warriors. So Sparta was a warrior culture, and everybody was raised to be a warrior, including the women. The women did Olympics, and they were trained in fighting in case they ever had to defend Sparta if foes came that far. So they weren't sent out into the battlefield, but they were ready and able to fight if they had to. In Athens, people received 2 full years of training, and they were eligible for military service from age 20 to age 60.
Oh, wow.
Everybody was in permanent reserve, what we would call the reserves.
Okay.
And there were no salaries. You
Right.
had to provide your own food, your own weapons, your own. If you were a wealthier person and you had a horse, you could be in the cavalry. But
Mhm.
no, the state didn't give you. All military service was considered civil service.
Mhm.
Everybody had to do it. Everybody had to be ready to defend their homes if they had to. And it was something the individuals were giving to the society because of everything the society gave them.
Mhm.
All of that is completely different. Even now, people who serve in the Greek military, it doesn't have the same demands as the ancient times had, but same thing. There's almost no salary. Families support their son or daughter when they're in the Greek military because it's still considered civil service, what you give back to the society for what it's given you. Um, every responsible culture took, a traditional culture took the time, a lot of time and a lot of support to bring warriors back. No sane culture thinks you can just bring them back and pop them into civilian life again and they'll be okay. Doesn't happen. Can't happen.
Right.
Uh, in the Bible, for example, Moses ordered all returning Israelite warriors from every battle. They didn't have a year-long deployment. They might have had to walk a couple of weeks to where they were going to fight.
Yeah.
So it's not that they went overnight and came right back, but they weren't sent away for a year or 2 years or 3 years. And after the battles were terrible, but then they went home. So it was one big battle for the most part. And Moses ordered that every single Israelite soldier had to spend a full week in isolation outside the village and not go home. And during that time, be attended by the priests and priestesses and go through intensive purification practices with fire and water to take the war out of them, to even cleanse their clothes and their weapons.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't go home with the pollution. Um, in Vietnam, because in contrast to the American experience there of invade and have a terrible year if you survive and come home and then your country ignores you or spits on you. Um, Vietnam has been invaded by older, stronger cultures for 2,000 years. China for most of the time, France for 200 years, and then We were just the last invaders. Actually, the Vietnamese sometimes don't even talk about the American invasion. They say, well, you weren't here for a long time, but you were the last colonialists to try to take our country away from us.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, the Vietnam War, your war, the American war, was a war for independence. We didn't want China, we didn't want Russia, and we only became communists because the West turned against us, and after World War II tried to give us back to France, which is true. And America said to Vietnam was our ally during World War II, fighting against the Japanese.
Okay.
Okay. Ho Chi Minh thought we're allies with the West, and in fact, we modeled our Declaration of Independence after the American Declaration of Independence. Of course, we're friends with the West now. We fought the fascists. They'll let us be free.
Yeah.
No, instead, France wanted the colony back. Truman said, okay. The oldest Vietnam veterans I've worked with in my career were World War II veterans who were in the Navy taking French soldiers back to Vietnam when the war was over rather than coming home. And the United States paid for 90% of the French war. So a
Wow.
lot of history that Americans need to know and we don't, that clarifies our misunderstanding of the past. Yes, okay, so the Vietnamese know how to take care of themselves during wars and since, because for over 2,000 years they've been invaded by larger, stronger countries.
Mm-hmm.
So Buddhism, Confucianism, worshiping ancestors, believing in reincarnation, honoring and praying for the souls of the dead, and many, many other practices, and that they were invaded, they weren't aggressors. So they don't have what we now call moral injury. We weren't invading other people to take their country and their goods away from them. We're only defending our own.
Mm-hmm.
They also have the concept of karma.
Mm-hmm.
And they do say there's historical as well as personal karma. So the Vietnamese say, well, about 3,000 years ago, when China took over the Viet people and tried to absorb all of them, the survivors went from southern China down into the territory that's Vietnam now.
Okay.
And so 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, we invaded the indigenous people and took their land away from them. So we Vietnamese people had bad historical karma, and we needed to be invaded and suffer the same pain we've caused to other people to balance our karma. So French and Americans, we don't hate you. You actually were healing us by teaching us how horrible war is and what we did to other people. And
Mm-hmm.
so we welcome you back. And we're all brothers and sisters because we've all survived hell together. So for all these reasons, Vietnamese do not have chronic wartime post-traumatic stress disorder. But we don't have any of those practices or teachings. And so we rush people home and ignore them. And yeah, you're home this afternoon. Well, yeah, there's your family waiting for you across on the tarmac. So fill out your form. Tell us, the military, officially, you don't have any PTSD symptoms, and go home. No, they're going home with the war inside them and in denial.
Yeah.
So of course there is massive drug abuse, alcohol abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse, child abuse, inevitably, of course, because we haven't taken the war out of them. They're still suffering inside. And what we call post-traumatic stress disorder is really the same consciousness, the brain, the heart, the soul working like it did in the combat zone, only the body's back here.
Yeah.
And hasn't been healed.
Yeah. And that's what that's what shamanism also does as well.
Mhm.
Soul retrieval.
Yes.
Because when you go through a PTSD, even if it's a car accident, it doesn't have to be as grand as a war. But if you go through a PTSD, and you can lose pieces of your soul.
Yes.
And we don't talk about that either, because we as the United States are still focused on the physical and mental level of health.
Right.
We're not even talking about emotions yet. It's kind of out there, but we don't even talk about how emotions have an effect on the body and how we live our life. So to talk about soul retrieval and power retrieval, because we can also have that loss of power, feeling powerless, feeling like what do I do now? Because no one's guiding me after the PTSD. No one's helping me. So now you have some loss of power and some loss of your soul. And people walk around like they're kind of like zombies, or they walk around dissociated
Mm-hmm.
from their family, their community. And I know before you were talking about the Greeks and how they had to um, not go home yet. They had to stay a week before going home.
Yes.
That actually reminded me of Native Americans use sweat lodges.
Yes.
And that too is to purify the war or any violence, really like the evil, the negative out of the body, anything that has happened. And that's what it reminded me of, was Native American sweat lodges as well.
Yes. 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 The Native Americans are also, they were warrior cultures,
Mhm.
and they had profound and long and deep rituals like the sweat lodges and vision quests and others for healing people, and especially for taking the war out of the warriors.
Mhm.
So, and a lot of the, as we mentioned, Crazy Horse was a medicine man, not,
Yep.
not only a warrior. Many of the greatest teachers and leaders of the Native American tradition were medicine men. So
Mhm.
Sitting Bull, very famous for being a chief and a warrior. Sitting Bull himself said that his most important role for his people was not warrior or chief, but he was medicine chief of the Hunkpapa Warrior Society.
Mm.
So that meant he was responsible for the spiritual healing of the warriors, just as you're saying. And so he conducted the sweat lodges and sent people on vision quests and did many of the ceremonies himself, and went through several sun dances himself in order to heal himself or to heal the warriors. And in their tradition, what we call post-traumatic stress disorder in the Lakota language is called Nahinapeapi, which translates as what you were saying, the spirits left. They
Mm.
don't say it's broken brain, there's something wrong with your brain chemistry. They say the spirits left. And when that happens, our holy people need to guide ritual to bring the spirit back into the person.
Mhm.
And so they had many, many ways of doing that. I'm also trained and initiated in Native American practices. But they had many, many ways for bringing the soul back. And they never would have just brought somebody back from a battlefield and said, go home to your family. Never, never, never.
No,
They
because
had,
they're also community oriented.
right.
Yeah.
And that harms the entire community.
Mhm.
And we have to take care of every community member. Nobody is a throwaway. Unfortunately, in our individualistic society, it's what you said. You're on your own. Take care of yourself. Get home if you can. But no more community. So you're out of the military, and you're not in community here. We all live alone, and you're on your own. Not even giving you the help you need, and would throw massive doses of pharmaceuticals at you, and
Yeah.
good luck.
Yeah.
So healing doesn't happen that way. And therefore, an inadequate, neglectful homecoming is a major source of PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And regarding your observations, and the one we're sharing, this is in some of my books about our warriors. So my two books, War in the Soul and Warriors Return, both talk about this extensively and propose, since we have the acronym PTSD, we could translate it, instead of stress disorder, post-traumatic soul distress.
Mm.
The soul and all of the symptoms aren't things to be medicated. They're the soul screaming its pain and anguish and, right, you're right, helplessness and hopelessness and lost condition. when it when we don't know how to say it and put it into words, it's in our bodies, as you rightly said, and we don't even have the words to express this terrible anguish, so our bodies are expressing it. So we are in soul distress. And also, as we're both affirming, uh, communal societies don't have the same kind of wound, and we spend literally billions and billions of dollars making war and destroying our people and other people and our planet. So, and that's also sick. So, PTSD is also post-traumatic social disorder.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an
Yeah.
individual pathology that that veteran or that car accident survivor has. It's a communal wound that we all have that we're forcing on the individuals and then
Mm-hmm.
diagnosing them and saying it's their problem,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, as you and I have both been saying, all of the massive social problems that America has are all symptoms of PTSD. Substance abuse, alcoholism, sexual abuse, domestic violence, street violence, high crime rates. All of this is PTSD.
Yeah.
So just look at the country and diagnose this country as having severe post traumatic soul distress and social disorder breaking down everywhere, and blaming the victims and saying it's an individual psychological diagnosis, and then giving them pharmaceuticals that feed the drug companies their massive profits, and nothing changes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for saying yes to this interview. And I look forward to attending one of your events again.
Thank you.